Welcome to the Millennials and Community Podcast. On this week's episode, join Matt and Carlo as they explore the idea of financial empowerment, how Carlo uses his expertise to help middle-income Canadians, how you can increase your financial knowledge, and how doing this will improve not only your own life, but the community around you. Thank you for being part of our community.
What's up, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Millennials and Community Podcast. This is Carlo, I'm Matt, and today, as always, we're excited to bring you a new, fresh, exciting new episode. But as always, to kick things off, we're going to do a little bit of an icebreaker before we tell you what this episode today is going to be all about. So, to start us off, Carlo, what's the weirdest job that you've ever had? And you know, what's the weirdest job that you've ever had? But then also, what would be the weirdest job, either real or imagined, that you can think of?
Oh. Okay, now I understand more of this. I was reading the episode prep and I was like, what does he mean by imaginary? Weirdest job I've ever had was real. I don't know if it was weird, but it was definitely interesting. I was a baggage handler for Air Canada. And yes, that did mean at a couple points in my career, I had to empty the blue poop juice out of the back of an airplane, which I will tell you is not a fun experience. Even though like you're not handling any of it, it's still not a fun experience.
Even hearing poop juice wasn't a fun experience.
You're welcome. Imaginary would have to be like those people that their responsibility is to help like cattle and horses reproduce. It's not imaginary. I know it's a real job. I just don't want to imagine it.
So counter-imaginary.
Yeah, we're imagining away from it.
Excellent. So I think the weirdest job that I ever had is also one that I think is the most fun. Now, not being of the Jewish faith myself, this is not something that I knew existed until this world was thrust upon me. But I, from time to time, get to work as both a MC and a dancer for bar and bat mitzvahs. And so you can imagine there's these parties to celebrate the coming of age of these youth, and the parties are most often more extravagant than any weddings that I've ever been to. And so, you know, obviously they're extravagant if they're hiring an MC, a DJ, and dancers to really activate and hype up the event. But basically I get to show up and I get to hype up these parties. And the most ridiculous one I went to was at the Hilton Hotel overlooking the Seattle Seahawks football stadium. And I remember standing there as they're setting up the event. The hotel staff is prepping the room for about 300 people. And these people were carrying in these white boxes that were, you know, some sort of composite plastic, and they're translucent white, and they're about 18 inches tall and maybe 4 feet by 4 feet. And I asked the person, I'm like, what's that? What are those for? And him, not knowing who I was and my role in the event, said, "Oh, they're light up boxes for the dancers." And I had this moment of like, I'm gonna be dancing on a light up box. It was very, very bizarre. So you know, that is my answer to both questions. One, because it is a real job that I get to do, and one that I never could have imagined if I had cared to imagine it.
Fair enough.
So on the note of jobs, and of course we, both you and I are lucky enough to work in jobs that we are very fulfilled by, that we're very passionate about, and that we get to make a difference through the work that we do. But when it comes down to it, jobs are a thing of utility.
A means to an end.
A means to an end, and they're a thing that is designed to earn us money. So today we're talking all about that, about what it means to be financially empowered, how it is that we can work to support ourselves and our families, and what are some strategies that we can use to make sure that we're able to take control of our finances, which, you know, is certainly something that is really, really important. So, Carlo, tell us a bit about the need for this topic, why this is so important. Like, take us and illustrate why this topic, why now?
Sure. So I think that money is a conversation that is intergenerational, right? There's never been anybody I've ever known that doesn't want to learn more about money, doesn't have this want for more when it comes to that aspect. But when you look at it in terms of the millennial lens, it's kind of this weird point because we have a lot of baby boomers now that are entering or at retirement that didn't save appropriately for it. They didn't save appropriately for their needs when they're going to be older and unable to continue to work or to care for themselves. We have a lot of the younger generation that millennials are having children, they're taking care of them. A lot of those kids are now entering ages where they're going to be either heading into school or have other financial obligations. So we are smack dab in the middle of two great monetary obligations. And historically speaking, your kids will always look to you to help them get through school. And when you have an elderly parent that can't take care of themselves, they're going to look to the younger generation to help out with that. And as good people, as family-oriented people, you want to be able to do those things, but that is a massive financial obligation. Meanwhile, you also want to live your own life and accomplish your own goals. So it's not necessarily something that just as millennials have only ever cared about, but it is something that we have to care about probably more than arguably most other generations prior to us.
And something that's certainly front of mind now, given the affordability crisis that we're seeing. That's certainly a term that's being coined very, very popularly in Canada right now, as well as the US, with the impact of inflation post-pandemic really, really wreaking havoc on the affordability of everything from housing to interest rates to all of the above. So certainly I think has always been important for all the reasons you said, but I think is particularly front of mind now given the current economic climate that we're in.
Yeah, and I think that another big thing too is that never before has there been so much financial information available to people. And unfortunately, a lot of it is bad financial advice. CBC just released a massive report on, they went and they brought hidden cameras into the 5 major banks of Canada, and every single bank was doing something shady to promote products or additional debt to people that were not in a position to really arguably take advantage of them. So, a lot of Canadians lean on our big banks to provide us with good financial education. That isn't good anymore. Then you look at social media and some of the stuff you see on there, that can't be trusted. So there's just so much confusion and so much uncertainty when it comes to our money. So it's a scary time.
So this is a really good segue, and I think maybe we should pause here to speak to our credibility. When I say our credibility, it sure isn't my credibility. You talk about the quality of information, and for those people who maybe you're finding this is your first opportunity to interact with the Mac podcast, give us a quick overview of your credentials, because certainly you are very, very qualified to speak on this topic. And so I want you'd have the ability to establish your credibility, so people that have gotten to this point and are worried about whether or not we have tinfoil hats on can have a second to gauge your validity to talk about this.
And I really appreciate that. So I've worked in the financial services industry for 15 years. I got my license when I turned 18. It was a little bit of a family business, and I was encouraged to do so by my parents. I'm licensed as a financial broker in Alberta. And what that basically means is that I educate and help people in pretty much all aspects of finance, including things like investments, insurance, certain loans, and when it comes to the financial industry, every small segment has pretty much its own licensing. You want to provide a mortgage, you got to be a licensed mortgage broker. You want to sell insurance, you got to be licensed for that. You want to sell investments, you got to be licensed for that. It's not one all-encompassing thing. So a lot of the work that I do is educational in all aspects, and then I assist the families I serve with the items that I am legally allowed to sell them. And then for everything else, I have referral structures to other licensed representatives that I can point them in the right direction, and they can help finish that off. So I'm certainly able to answer the majority of people's questions, but even then, it is my responsibility to say to people, that is not an area I'm licensed in. Let me get you in contact with somebody that is. And that is probably one of the biggest shortcomings we see in social media, is nobody's ever willing to admit that is not something they are legally allowed to advise on.
That's true. Everyone making content is an expert in something, and we usually like to inflate the breadth or the scope of our expertise.
Yeah.
So, awesome. Thank you for doing that. I really, really appreciate that. So let's dig a little bit deeper into why this is timely, why this matters. So let's kind of just go into some stats. Let's do some hard hitting realities to kind of illustrate the challenges that exist. So start us off. What proportion of millennials do we find that are struggling in some way with finance?
So in North America, we're looking at 53% of all millennials report that financial uncertainty keeps them up at night. So I'm sure it's a much higher percentage of people that are actually concerned on a day-to-day basis, but that means it bothers them enough that they're not getting rest at night. That's the last thing they're thinking about at night, the first thing they're thinking about in the morning. 54% of millennials specifically mention that they are suffering some sort of anxiety or depression based off of their anxiety over their financial situation. So to compare it, 47% of Gen Zers and 20% of boomers actually have this concern. So the highest of any of the immediately local generations, right? And there's a lot of different reasons for this. It can be a high debt load. So when you look at a millennial in specific, lots of student loan because we were told, hey, go to school, get a good job. It is going to be the debt from owning a home if you are lucky enough to be one of those people. Because if we look back a couple years ago, during COVID, our interest rates dropped to 2%, which made home ownership significantly more attainable, even at higher prices. And we were told by our governmental officials, don't worry, it's going to be at 2% for a while. And sure enough, people bought homes. Arguably, they were put into homes they couldn't afford. Now our interest rates have gone up. You know, your mortgage payment went from $1,200 a month to $2,400, $3,000 a month because your interest rate doubled. So that has put people in a lot of bad positions. High consumer debt. I think the number right now is we owe $1.84 for every dollar we make on our credit cards, right? So that can be one. Recessions. We're not officially in a recession right now, but when you look at the amount of money that people are earning to the amount that they're making, or the amount they're earning to the amount they're spending, we can say that we're in some sort of a recession there. And then, of course, climate change. Look at the cost of oil, how that's gone up. Look at the cost of just general maintenance to our homes. We're all trying to be more energy and environmentally friendly. Well, that takes money. So to do that, that puts an extra pressure because we are millennials and we think that if we don't make a difference now for our younger generations, nobody's going to do it for us. So we put that on ourselves as well. And then lastly is going to be the housing costs. Buying a house, taking care of a house, the cost for your heating, for your electricity, for your groceries, all of that is up.
So tell us a little bit more about debt, because I think certainly a lot of us, and you mentioned some already, of some of the debt load that people are carrying, both consumer debt, student debt, housing debt. But tell us a little bit more about kind of the impact of debt currently.
Sure. So to shift away a little bit from the stats, because let's face it, you guys can get stats almost anywhere you want. And we're going to hit you with more of those. But the effect of debt can be really all-encompassing. So if we look at it on the monetary level, when you're in a large amount of debt, it's going to make it more difficult to do almost anything else, right? Our consumer debt is structured in such a way that it is designed to keep you in that debt. If you've ever had a credit card bill, you can take a look at that and it's going to tell you your minimum payment. And then by law, it's also supposed to tell you if you make this minimum payment, how long it's going to take you to pay off that card. Well, that could be $1,000 credit card bill and your minimum payment is $10 a month. And you would say, well, arguably, $10 a month, there's 12 months in a year. It's going to take me, 9 years to pay this off. No, when you factor in interest, that will take you likely 15, 16 years to pay off if you pay just $10 a month. Now, I certainly hope that's not what you're doing, but the reality of it is that is what some people are forced to do, is only pay the minimums because that's all they can afford. Your mortgage, personally speaking, is the single most damaging product any Canadian family could ever own. It is designed to keep you in debt. So it makes it difficult to go and buy a house if you have a large amount of credit card or student loan debt. It makes it more difficult to be able to turn around and buy a car that you might need to get to and from your work, right? On top of that, there is the kind of the anxiety that it can induce if you own a large amount of debt and you are in any sort of collections, having a phone call from a number you don't know, thinking that this could be the collections agency calling me for the 14th billionth time. If you've ever had a bill that maybe you did pay it and there was like an accounting error, you'll know how persistent those people can be. And having to like explain away, like, I don't have the money, or I've already paid this dang bill, leave me alone, is just anxiety inducing, right? So debt can be really, really damaging and really all encompassing for people.
And I think you've really done a great job of capturing some of the feelings associated with debt and how challenging it can be for people to just feel stuck, right? In that. And I would imagine too that for a lot of people that are in those sorts of circumstances, that's probably in all likelihood taking away from their ability to plan for the future. And so the problem just snowballs. So, out of the people that you speak to, or maybe even more generally, do you think that millennials are adequately setting themselves up for retirement, for their later years, for the future?
No, but arguably there isn't a generation out there that as a whole is setting themselves up for retirement. It used to be that if you got a good job, that job came with a good pension, right? Or an RSP matching platform. And it's not to say that you won't find those anywhere, but it is harder to find them, and harder to find them in a position that at the end of it all, if let's say you worked for the same company for 40 years and you were contributing what you were supposed to as part of that matching program, that by the time you hit 65, that is going to be enough. Because we are fighting an uphill battle on both sides. One, are you saving enough? And two, is the cost of everything growing at a rate slower than what you're saving, right? So inflation is a really big factor for it. If you take a look at your average 35-year-old Canadian wants to retire at 65, let's say he makes 44 grand a year. Inflation in Canada is averaged over 100 years, 4%. By the time that person is 65, he will need to be making $160,000 a year to afford everything then that he did on 44 grand. So is he saving enough to make sure that he can supply himself with that when he is no longer working? And the answer is probably not, because he's trying to live a life full of all the other things that life is supposed to be full of. Plus he's probably also got some debt.
Wow. Mm-hmm. So significant challenges and hard, I think, for a lot of us. Certainly I find myself in this category, hard for us to imagine or envision the significance of what sorts of savings and supports we need to have available to us in our later years. And I think that illustrated number of the compounding effects of inflation over the long term of our life and our career is really, really stark for a lot of us.
Yeah. So like if we were to look at, getting back to a little bit of the stats, according to North American records, roughly speaking, a millennial on average will have about $51,300 in their personal savings. Okay. So that is personal savings. That is not dedicated retirement savings. So what does that encompass? Well, that means that if the car breaks down and you need a new transmission, it's going to come out of that, right? If you have a large credit card bill, it's going to come out of that. You want to go on a vacation, it's going to come out of that. So I think a lot of the millennial generation has this kind of like floating savings in and out, and that comes from a level of uncertainty, because most good retirement investments are going to be something that requires a certain level of discipline and locked in. Now, when I say locked in, it doesn't mean you can't absolutely access that money. It means that it is designed in such a way that they want to promote you to leave that money until retirement. So if there is an emergency, it's a lot harder for you to reach into that piggy bank and pull it out. So because that uncertainty exists, we're less likely to say, I'm going to commit that money to my retirement, and more to, I'm just going to try and put it in a place where if something happens, I can still access it, but hopefully I can also use that for retirement. Well, that means you're likely getting less of a rate of return on that money, so it's not growing as well. And you're also more likely to reach into that piggy bank when emergency happens. So when push comes to shove and you're 65 and you look back at all the things that have happened over your life, you're like, I had lots of money in there at one point, but I had to keep eating away at it, right? So like on these high cost of living times right now, that's what a lot of people are doing, is they're eating into their retirement savings. And we're not the first generation to do this, but when you look at the average age of a millennial, I think we're between 28 and 43, something like that right now. 53 grand is not enough if you're in your late 40s. Now, please, that little giggle of mine is not to ridicule in any way. It's the state of the affair is almost insulting to be like, after everything that the generations before us have happened for us to be in this position is, it's upsetting. Right.
Well, I know that certainly for myself, I know that I personally had to, take on some debt over the pandemic. The nature of my work changed pretty drastically. And so for the first half of the pandemic, I was effectively unemployed, working in schools in a contract business capacity wasn't something that was feasible, right? Schools weren't bringing providers into their facilities to work with the kids, and understandably so. And so I had to take on some debts. And so I understand the weight that holds on me as I work on paying that off. But I'm sure that you, in the position that you have, certainly you hear just the most incredibly challenging stories from some of your clients and some of those things. And so, I guess, we'll get to more specific strategies a little bit later on, but in terms of like a mindset, what are you seeing either in the mindsets of people you work with that are struggling with their finances, and where do you see kind of the light switch or the turning of the corner where people find themselves in mindsets where they're able to more constructively put themselves in a direction, be successful?
That's a great question. So the general mindset is either a sense of frustration or it's a sense of, I give up, which is a very, very dangerous place to be, because you're basically resigning to living your life in a sense of debt. And like basically saying, well, I don't feel like there's a way I could ever retire, so I guess I'll just continue to work and maybe spend a little bit more frivolously. And, the treat culture that we talked about in one of our previous episodes becomes a little bit more resilient. So there's a lot of that. We do live in Alberta, which is a province that has some arguably higher paying career paths. So I do have a fair amount of clientele that are doing better than most. So they definitely don't have a sense of resignation, but they do have a sense of like, man, things are really expensive. So like even them are looking at ways to cut back and maybe not even do more saving right now, but just spend less in all aspects. And sometimes that actually does mean reducing the amount that they're saving because, groceries have doubled and tripled in price. So where does that switch flip, and where does the mentality change? It changes when people have the realization that what they have been taught by their schools and by their banks and by their large financial institutions is not the be all end all, right? Because the very basic, low level, very little financial education that we get through our public school system teaches you to basically follow the status quo. You go to the bank for your mortgage, you go to the bank for your credit card, you go to the bank for this. You want to save some money, savings account, right? You buy a GIC, you buy an RSP. Well, a lot of these programs have been around, and again, this is a little bit of a personal opinion of mine, but a lot of these programs have been around for like well over 100 years. And the argument that can be made is they don't really work anymore. So if that's the case, it falls on us as the younger generations to explore the different things. Like, you got to understand that financial companies are constantly innovating, right? A good investment firm is looking across the world and they're going, what can we invest in that not only is going to lead to a good rate of return for our clients and for our company, but is going to be something that people feel socially responsible about. And believe it or not, there's a lot of new investment funds that are focused on green and renewable energy, so that they know, hey, if somebody's going to invest, they can feel good that they're not investing in a company that's polluting the world, because that's something that's important to our generation. So these companies know that, and they're actually paying attention to that. So that is something that, if you realize that I can go do a little bit of research and I can find a company that I like the way that they're taking their direction of movement, I can invest in that. I can look at them for my financial products. I can look at them for my financial education, right? Then you are arguably more likely to find something that is not just designed to keep you in debt. It is designed to help you flourish. So that's where that switch flips, is people go, oh, I can go and learn things on my own, and I can implement them even in small ways to make my financial life better.
And I would imagine too that everything that you're suggesting is probably more of an opportunity as a millennial, given the fact that we still, as millennials, have a fairly significant runway for these different financial products to go to work for us. And so we probably have, in this age bracket as millennials, more flexibility in terms of the types of things, the degree of risk, because we still have a relatively long runway. Tell us a little bit more about that from the perspective of millennials and the opportunity. And maybe I'm completely off base. Maybe the risk profiles are starting to narrow. Like, what opportunities do we have as millennials when we think about different sorts of monetary instruments that we're looking to use to support our financial well-being, that maybe older generations might not have the same luxury or opportunity in working with?
Sure. Well, you're definitely not off the mark. You're very right. Like, if you start saving now when you're 30, you got so much more time to not only let the compounding effect take its toll, which means you can save less money on a regular basis now and end up with more later than somebody who is, let's say, 55 and they've got 10 years before they want to retire. They have to save significantly more. They have to try and run for more, higher rates of return, which arguably is higher, a lower chance on a short time period. So when you're young, not only can you save less, but you can approach things with a higher degree of risk. So, when you look at the way the financial markets have worked over a 15-year period, there is no 15-year period since the inception of our financial markets that has not ended up in a positive trend. So there may be a 5-year period where we were down, but over 15, it's historically never been down. So you can arguably put money in a place now, take a little bit of risk with it. Now, I'm not talking about going out and, buying some sort of high risk cryptocurrency. That's a different conversation entirely. Not to say cryptocurrencies are bad, but you can take a little bit more risk, be okay with a bad year or two, and know that you'll still come out ahead, right? So you can take that. And then if we are going to touch on the fact, again, I'm not licensed in cryptocurrencies because there is no licensing for cryptocurrencies, which is a problem in itself. But those higher risk investments, people can play in those markets a little bit more, knowing that, hey, if I lose a few grand here or a few grand there with the potential of making a whole bunch later, that's okay if you're in your 30s. It's not okay if you're in your 60s. That could be the end of your retirement in your 60s.
So let me just make sure that I was understanding the last comment that you made, because for those of you listening on Apple Podcast, Spotify, any of those platforms, and didn't get the benefit of Carlo's hand gestures, just making sure that I'm understanding and saying it a different way. So you're saying that over any given 15-year period of time, that there has always been a net increase in the market. Yeah. That's so meaning at any given point in time, the difference between the start of a 15-point period and the end of a 15-year period is always higher.
Yeah. Now, when you look at it statistically speaking, what if you bought at the absolute highest day point, and then 15 years later just happened to be the absolute possible lowest point? Well, that might be a break even.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that increase would necessarily pace inflation either, but it would still net be growth.
No, well, so here's the thing, and I don't want to get into an economics lesson here, but when we have a growth over a long period of time, you got to understand that the world as a whole is out to make money. Okay, so it is the job of every investment firm, of every corporation, to make money at a faster rate than inflation, because we of course pay the inflation when our groceries go up, but the company that makes the product also pays the inflation on all of the materials and ingredients to make that product. So they have to outpace inflation. So when you look at it, even if you were to look at what's called an indexed return, which is just the return of the market as a whole, that will almost always outpace inflation.
Gotcha.
Right? The only thing that doesn't outpace inflation is if you go to a bank and you say, I want, this guaranteed investment certificate, and they go, great, your interest rate on that is going to be 2.25%, but inflation averages 4%, and we're going to lock you in for 5 years. At the end of those 5 years, you will have not a chance to ever outpace inflation because you locked in at 2.25, but inflation is 4%. So it doesn't matter where you save your money. You have to put it in a place that has the potential to outpace inflation. And there are very few locked in guaranteed rate of return investments that will almost ever do that.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. So often I think we look at finances as being very individualistic. It's something that affects me, it affects my family, and it's not necessarily the business of other people around us. And so I was hoping that you could touch on for us kind of the community aspect to this, because I think so much of what's lost in a conversation about finances is how our communities or societies are impacted by the weight of the accumulated consumer debt or some of these other big challenges. Even the aging population certainly has a big impact. So tell us a little bit at a community level, of course, being millennials and community, about how, a discussion of this nature about our finances, our ability to be prepared for our future and our retirement. What does that mean at a more societal or communal level?
Sure. So I want to start it off by kind of sharing this little story. When you come out of high school and you go into university, generally speaking, most younger generations have this idea of, I'm going to conquer the world, right? I can accomplish all the goals and I can do everything. And then, maybe you come out of university a few years later and it's I'm not conquering the world, I'm conquering Canada. And then a couple more years goes by and, you've had a job for a bit and maybe a little bit of debt. And now I'm not going to conquer Canada. I'll conquer Alberta and then Calgary and then my neighborhood. And then maybe I can conquer the barbecue in the backyard this weekend. And I think that's a great way of putting it, because when you look at it on a large level, it's so easy for this to be daunting. And you're like, oh, okay, well, Canada as a whole, we're in a recession. What does that mean for me? And how do I do this? So you almost have to bring it in a little bit more. So let's look at it on a kind of a community level. Well, your community level, look at a community that has a lower average income, higher rates of crime, less communal activities, right? We go outside of those communities to try and find genuine things, right? Like think about how many higher income communities in Calgary have beautiful community centers. And whenever you go in them, they're packed with people. But then you have a lower income community center and it's like maybe that gets rented out once a month for someone's birthday. And then you have a low income community center and nobody goes there because that's where the crime is. It's where people hang out that shouldn't be hanging out, right? So on a communal level, I think it makes it much forced to be more individualistic because sometimes it means higher crime. And then you look at it on a family level. Well, when the family is prosperous or financially educated, and I say this in a very personal degree because my family did not grow up with lots of money. But what I will say is that the best gift that my parents ever gave me is they were open about our finances. We would sit down on a monthly basis. Dad would pull out the credit card and the bank statement, and he would sit down and be like, okay, let's look at all the money we spent. Where'd that go? What was that for? Where did this happen? So when a family is well financial educated, and most importantly, they're not afraid to be open about their finances with their kids, that leads to a much healthier financial environment, right? It's when our parents are ashamed or try to hide the family's position that I think that not only does it lead to our kids growing up with less financial education and them also being afraid of it, but it means the kids aren't willing to help out. They don't understand that how come I can't get a toy at the grocery store, right? But if your kids know what's going on, like my mom used to tell me, she would look at me and she'd be like, no, Carlo, you can't, because dad still has to pay the mortgage and pay the bills. And I knew dad went to work to pay the mortgage, pay the bills, and then buy me toys. There was an order of operations, but I would have never known that if my parents weren't open with me.
And I think that takes us really nicely into the next thing that we want to talk about, which, again, you bring just this wealth of expertise and this knowledge, and I would certainly recommend from my own personal experience, but also certainly from the experiences that you've shared with me in terms of your capacity to work through your profession to support families in this way. So if you're interested in a professional capacity of reaching out to Carlo for some professional advice, please do that. I highly recommend you doing that. But maybe at a high level, or take this wherever you like to, what are some just general tips? Like, this is taking us into our make actions count, our MAC section, which again, for those of you who are struggling in this area, it can feel so overwhelming, lots of anxiety, sleepless nights, and you just need kind of those first steps to start the wheels turning. And so where would you take us? Like, what are some high level strategies or tips, things that you would recommend to anybody who might be listening?
Sure. And I am going to go high level with this. I'm not going to recommend a specific product to you. I'm not going to tell you to go and talk to this person or do this thing. That's not the point here, because those are conversations you need to have as a family with a financial professional that you trust. But really high level, the first thing you need to do is you need to sit down. You need to spend the time figuring out where your money is going. What's coming in, what's going out, average it out. I hate to say it, but do the math. Okay. And the reason for that is, I think, especially in troubling times, in more expensive times where you're at that level of like, I just can't handle it anymore. It's so easy to I'm just going to put it on the credit card and I'll figure it out when the bill comes. And, I've been there, I get it. But if you don't have an understanding of how things are coming in and out, there's no hope for you to ever get better. Right. And you look at the people that have won the lottery, right? I think it's something like over 90% of lottery winners end up back in the same financial bracket that they were prior to winning the lottery, because they never did that. They got all this money and they never figured out how it was going in and out. They never saw the account start to go down, right? So you have to have an understanding and spend the actual time. Most people will spend more time planning for their next vacation than they will for their money. And that is a huge recipe for disaster, right? You have to, and I don't mean to say this to sound like another boomer, right? You have to look at, are there things that I'm spending money on that are arguably frivolous? And this is really easy to do in our current time, because everything is designed to market to you and take your money. Right? We started off with Netflix. Well, now we have Amazon Prime, and now we have this, and now we have that, right? We have a billion different subscriptions. Companies have understood that the subscription model is one of the best ways to continue to make a recurring revenue off of you. You used to be able to buy a computer program, one-time fee, a couple $100. Now, don't worry, it's $15 a month, but you're going to use that for 10 years. right? So, are you spending money on Starbucks every day? Starbucks doesn't need any more of your money. I'm sorry, make the coffee at home. And I say this as a non-Starbucks drinker, don't attack me. But like, are there places that you're spending money that really you could pull back on if your financial picture requires you to do so? And then lastly, break the stigma about talking about it. I'm going to put in the show notes a wonderful TED Talk by a lady who shares her story about how she lost her brother to the fact that he would not talk about his financial situation, and he ended up ending himself because he was too afraid to share his financial position when people could have helped. Now that's the complete offside, terrible, worst position you could be in, but break the stigma, be open to sharing not only with your family, but also with your community, your friends, how you're doing. Because Matt, you shared with me earlier today a position where like you had an opportunity to go out for an amazing dinner and you had to have the conversation with the person who invited you. Like, that's wonderful. I'd love to go, but is this something that I should be spending the money on right now? Right? And that takes a lot of bravery to say to a friend, I don't think I can afford it. And if you had not said that, you might be in a worse position than you are now. So like, hats off to you. But yeah, you have to break the stigma with the people you care about. I'm not saying go and share off the rooftops that maybe you're in debt, but like have the hard conversations. Because if we don't break this stigma, our kids are going to be worse off and their kids are going to be worse off. Right. And the idea of my kids having to pay for me to go through retirement scares the ever living out of me. That's my rant.
I appreciate that. And I know, I'm looking forward to this episode being published, because I think that's a section I'm going to listen to again and again. And it's going to help inspire me to be better and certainly take better control of my financial situation too. And so I really appreciate that. Is there anything else that you wanted to share on this before we move into our wrap up and our closing question and our gratitudes?
I think the last thing that I would share with you is that I know a lot, and I'm wonderfully blessed to have a good financial upbringing, to be in an industry that has taught me so much. But I don't know it all. I still make financial mistakes. I still try things and they don't work. So be willing to learn. Be willing to learn from somebody like me. Be willing to learn from past experiences. Be willing to learn from somebody that maybe even you see on social media, but do your own learning. Don't blindly follow the advice of someone. Ask the questions, do the math, find somebody you trust to help you. And you will learn more about money. If you commit to that, even for a month, 3 months, 6 months, you will learn more about money in that time period than most people do in their lives.
Thank you for sharing that. So as our closing question leading us into gratitudes, want to kind of paint the picture of a time capsule. So if you were to think about financial services industry, and you were opening up a time capsule that kind of exemplified the financial services industry from however long ago, what are some things that you would hope that you would find in that time capsule that we could bring back into the conversation about financial services today?
Well, and that's a funny one. I had to give it some thought because the financial industry does this. You can look back online any year you want, get pretty much the interest rate, the credit card rate, anything. So to really drive it home, I'm going to share a stat. Matt, how much, if you were to buy a house based off the Calgary Real Estate Board in 1950 here in Calgary, 3-bedroom bungalow, nice community, what do you think you would have paid for that house?
Ooh, I'm going to go with $70,000.
$10,000.
Ooh.
The average home price in Canada in 1950 was $8,600.
Oh, wow.
So that time capsule exists. You want to really get upset? Go look at it. Yeah, it's there.
Amazing. I think for me, and this is maybe going to lead into a deeper conversation, so I'll just kind of drop this and leave it here. I think that there's a lot to be said for the privileges that we have in Alberta in terms of our economy, but I also think that our governments historically have taken advantage of those privileges and not set us up for sustained future success in terms of our provincial taxation models. And so, I would love to, go back to a place where we had to have really sustainable taxation models that we would have kept and then been able to take advantage more of resource revenue as a result. And certainly that doesn't really speak to individual finances as much, but I think that a lot of people in Alberta have a boom bust mindset because we've been raised in a boom bust province. And so that's something that I would like to be able to come back and almost, it sounds ridiculous, and anyone who wants to reach out and have a conversation with this with me about this from a political perspective, but I'd love to go back and talk about undoing the Alberta advantage, which hot take maybe, but yeah, happy to chat. Anyone who wants.
Yeah, well, I think that would be a good conversation for sure.
So something that I'm really, really grateful for from you, and this has been true for years, you talk about removing the stigma, and it can be, for someone who's highly educated in an area or has that expertise, it can be very daunting often to speak or to share from a position of knowing less with somebody who knows more. And you always make yourself so accessible and open to having those conversations and to be willing to share your expertise and the things because you do so genuinely care about the well-being and the success of people around you. And so I just wanted to say how grateful I am that you always are able to do that, even from a position, removing those intimidation barriers to being accessible to me and others.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's been a career goal of mine, is to try and take these things and put them in a position that people can understand and that they're not afraid to ask the questions. My gratitude for you is that you do ask the questions, and you do this both not only, by giving me this opportunity to stand on my soapbox for the episode, but also in everyday life. You ask me these things, and you take a genuine interest in my professional opinion. And I'm going to say this with all love and care for some of the people in my life, but there are people, even having arguably a wealth of knowledge in me as a friend, who don't utilize me. Now, I'm not judging them for that in any way, shape, or form, but it is nice to have somebody that trusts and cares enough for me to let me help them. So I appreciate that about you. Thank you. Right? And just before we close off, what I want to do say is that the timing of this episode is quite fortuitous. We are looking at doing what I want to call the Millennials and Community and Money Night in May, probably early May, details to follow. But this is going to be an event held locally here in Calgary. We're still playing with the idea of making it virtually available. But it is a night meant to have some fun, learn a little bit about money, and get exposed a little bit more to some of the education that might not be available to you unless you know where to look. So some details to follow on that, but I'm really, really excited about that event. I'm running it with some guys from my office, so stay tuned if that's something that interests you.
It's definitely something that I'm looking forward to as well, and we hope that some of you who are local to Calgary are able to set aside some time to come and socialize with us and learn with me anyways, and hopefully there's going to be opportunities to share some of that work virtually as well.
Awesome.
So thank you, everybody. This has been a really, really informative, wonderful episode. I hope that you were able to take something away, and if nothing else, leave with a sense of assurance that you have some more capacity, some more ability to take control of whatever your financial situation is. So once again, you know how to find us. You can access us on any of your podcasting platforms, social media platforms, and we hope that you do. We hope that you reach out, like, comment, subscribe, follow, and as always, we can't wait to see you again in our next episode. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now. Hi, guys. It's Carlo here. Thank you for listening to our latest episode. It's the support of our community like you that allows us to continue to grow and make this into something truly extraordinary. If you enjoyed today's episode and you would like to listen to it without the interruption of ads and maybe even experience some bonus content, I'd invite you to join us on our newly launched Patreon. And if maybe that's not something you can do right now, please consider liking, subscribing, sharing, and commenting. on places like YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, all that good stuff. You'll find us under @Millennials and Community for pretty much all of those. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you again soon.